Welcome everyone to the March 14th Pi Day version of the KUDO meetup. I'm Tom Runyon. I'll be hosting today. I want to thank everyone for coming in and spending some time here. Wanted to start off with active KEPs that are being worked on and developed. And with that, I pass it over to Jared for dynamic CRDs.
Cool. And do you want me to share my screen for the agenda, or do you want to share yours? Or
Great idea. I can share mine since I'll be moderating.
Perfect. Ooh, agenda. Okay. Yeah, I have no new business on dynamic CRDs. As a recap of last week, we've talked about doing ref counting on the controller runtime at the moment. We're probably going to have to rely on that for some time because this is a bug up in the Kubernetes API server. I am not up to date on the status of that bug, but if we're going to maintain compatibility with the Kubernetes versions, the Kubernetes compatibility matrix, we'll need to support KUDO and watches, knowing that that bug's there at least for 2 versions after the version with that bug fix, right? So we'll be dependent on this version of controller runtime for a little while in this watch workaround. So it's definitely not a short-term fix. That's my only update. There's been no code movement on that in the past week.
So the scope of your work on implementing that fix is a function of what support matrix we're deciding to provide for KUDO.
Yes, which we haven't decided upon, but by default, I'm bubbling up to the Kubernetes one. And since that's, yeah, I don't have any basis for that, right? So we may want to just discuss that, but that's exactly that basis, right? I don't want to just roll to the new version of the Go client SDKs that assume an API server that's fixed this, when there's a reasonable chance that someone's still running backwards supported versions of Kubernetes.
How does this impact our test suite / clients that we use inside of our vendor folder? Do we need to?
We should probably all talk about that. I don't know. From the context of this cap, my focus here is just relying on the watcher dealing with this, right? And then let's have a separate talk about that. Maybe that fits into the testing cap, and we expand that to get compatibility there. We should start. I'll put a note into the agenda. Let's have a issue or another discussion about that, because I don't even. Well, yeah, we should just figure out a time to have a discussion about that one.
This seems like the first instance where we're leveraging something that's not available in previous versions, mainly because it's not even there yet. Most of the other functionality that we're using in our Kubernetes clients are pretty stable. They've been around for a decent amount of time. So
yeah, and because this is a bug, but because it's not a excuse me, because this is not a security fix, there's no guarantee it'll get backported to the current matrix, right?
Okay. Yeah, we'll follow up with that. Thanks, Jared. Fabi, you've got an open merge request, pull request for some CLI functionality. Do you want to go over the status of that?
That is correct. Yeah. Thank you, Tom. It's open. It's a large PR for the install functionality. Yes, and I addressed already most of the review items. There is a conflict. We merged in the meantime a bunch of new things that has to be fixed. But I also want to get a thumbs up from at least two reviewers, so making sure that we don't merge it if there's just maybe one review from up or so, and have that in there, because it's kind of like blocking a bunch of other stuff that I'm working on, and then iterate from there. I don't expect it to be 100% perfect in terms of naming, or if but that, like for instance, certain tests, certain unit tests, they're not 100% perfect, and I don't expect them to ever be. But there's also a great opportunity for other people to, for the community especially, to jump in and make small fixes. Like for instance, moving validation of the args argument or flags or whatever into other functions or as they see fit. I think that gives other people kind of a surface to start interacting with us, not with a large PR like this one, but like having smaller changes that they can PR. So
those review comments that you think would be great, future items, are you going to leave those as open issues in the repo, or how are you going to track some of those changes that were requested but maybe we don't want to pull in right now?
I'm indifferent there. I think that is something we can discuss maybe here, what you guys think would be the best fit. We can open issues for that and tag that maybe for a future version. Another thing that we should maybe think about is that we should add there as well, which we don't have. When we want to file bugs, there it's helpful that we have this kind of like KUDO version command that shows you also the hash of which current like version you are using and so forth. So those are probably things when you think about the version, that we tag it with a certain version number, and maybe those issues will be then attached to a new milestone that has a new version number or so. But in order to do that, we would probably need this version feature first as well. So I was bringing it up. But issues would be one thing. The other thing would be fixing it now, of course, without doing the issues, and then having maybe people, if they disagree, revert it or doing it differently as well in a future version. That is also something that wouldn't require an issue to be filed. I don't have a strong opinion about that. So no.
I do think it would be good to get something in sooner rather than later, just because the longer this waits, the more master is changing, and then the larger that merge request seems.
So probably what I'll do is like resolving the conflicts that we have right now, making it, bringing it to a state where we can merge it, and then getting it merged after having two reviews that say you can merge it, and go over the PR again and see what hasn't been changed, and probably then open an issue. So we have it at least somewhere captured as well, and don't forget about it. And maybe label those issues then also with like create first commit or PR, so people kind of like can go over it and see that this is a good starting point.
Sounds good. So and we welcome comments for not just the reviewers that are mentioned explicitly, but anyone who wants to check that out and see what it feels like to install frameworks using the paradigm that Fabi's been working on. We'll definitely get some good user experience feedback.
And I have for later on open discussions a few things that might maybe touch on also how the install process will look like or will go, and there will be for sure more changes. So, okay, that's it from me.
Hey, Fabi, I have one thing to just flag you on that's interesting in the CLI cap. So there's a thread going on in SIG architecture, and I don't follow SIG CLI, but I'm assuming it's going on there, is putting crew, KREW, into the Kubernetes kubectl CLI as well. So that may give us a less install path for installing the KUDO plugin.
I thought they were asking to make it an official SIG owned.
Is that what they're doing?
Project, not the customized merge into kubectl. I think it's just going to be SIG owned.
Oh, cool. Okay, then never mind.
I will. Either way, it sounds interesting. I have a look. Is there a cap for this or?
I figure just slot into the CLI one as distribution.
I think there's a cap for adding crew.
Oh, like a Kubernetes. There's so many forms of the word cap. Never mind.
Okay. Yeah, that is interesting. I'll look into that. If you find the link to the cap, I couldn't find it at ad hoc. Can you add it to the agenda or so, or send it in the KUDO channel so can I have a look?
Let's see if I can find it.
Yeah, totally.
Awesome, thanks.
I'm using it for plugins now. It's pretty cool. I mean, it's a plugin that installs plugins. So, nice.
All right.
Yeah, it'd be good to get that as like an installer for adding KUDO, and then once we have the KUDO plugin for kubectl, having that have the ability to install KUDO on the cluster.
So you can kind of use it as a distribution so thinking about this for the CLI would be also interesting. For instance, if you have Kafka and they have a special kind of like you want to integrate in the CLI special Kafka commands for creating topics and so forth, that this could be an standalone package that you basically then install to your CLI client side.
Well, that'd be cool.
That can be distributed then over this. That would be interesting. Yeah, I'll look at. I see you posted it.
The form. It was not a cap. It was just on the email chain.
All right. Thanks.
Yep. Thanks, Bobby. On the testing side, we do have an open outline about what's being tested, but some of the baselines that were already decided got merged in. So we have Circle CI hooked up, and it took me a little bit of time to get some stuff up and working. But one of the value adds is that we now have this awesome button label to show that things are passing. And then pull requests, let's actually have a validation before they can merge. So it doesn't show it there anymore. But new PRs will have that when they're branched from master. As a result, all current PRs should merge master in before getting merged, so that the .circleci folder is present in the branch, so that CircleCI knows about what tests to run. The current implementation of our testing is pretty basic. It basically calls this check formatting, which does a couple things. It installs some dependencies that now we have in vendor, so we're now pulling them at runtime. Which should help with consistency on tooling and any networking issues that happen. It does a go vet and a go lint to make sure that common best practices inside of Go are being handled. So comments above public functions, for instance, is one thing that'll get checked. And then we run a test command, which now lives inside this test folder, which checks two things. That Go format doesn't actually change the contents of our Go files, and then Go import doesn't change any of the import ordering. So that'll just provide some standardization for what things are going to look like going forward, and it should simplify merges if things get out of whack, because some people have different formats than others. This should standardize all that. If people have other things that they would like to test, we are now, add comments here to the PR for the CI/CD outline, issue merge requests into either the formatting or the make file about what actually happens. We need to, one thing we did not do is actually run Go tests yet. And the reason being Kubi Builder, the framework that we use to build the skeleton for our controllers, comes with a suite of runtime packages that let you stand up and simulate a Kubernetes server. Those weren't working by default inside of the base images that were provided by CircleCI, and there were some issues temporarily getting them stood up. So that's another thing that we're going to have to actually start working towards. But as a first step, we got something up and working, and we can now expand upon that and start running tests and getting that framework up and running. Anyone have comments, questions about Circle CI and the tests that we're currently doing, or ideas about plans that we want to do later?
So the tests that we're currently doing, we don't check for races and so forth, because there's currently an issue going on with Circle CI and the cube builder test.
It's mostly the image that we're using to do all these builds stands up inside of it a kube API server, and that was timing out. Well, originally there was no etcd that was being stood up because there wasn't the binary installed in that base image. So after installing Kube Builder in a image to be used by Circle CI, we were still having timeout issues about waiting for the API server to start up. I think that was probably find the actual log messages. So we were getting these timeouts waiting for the Kube API server to start. So there's something there that I wasn't exactly sure how to solve now. So I just wanted to get something in quickly, and then we can tackle that going forward. Maybe reach out to that team about how they do testing for their frameworks inside of CI/CD systems.
Should we file an issue for that, just to track this?
Yeah,
Cool.
Sure. That sounds good.
One other thing, I just turned this on for forked PRs as well, so that's off by default. I just noticed.
That's good. Can people fork this successfully now? I think, was that an issue?
Yeah, Matt was having issues with that.
Forking should be fine. Like I think there was just an isolated incident with Matt. The problem with the forking was when it's a private repo, but all of our repos are public, and so I don't see there a problem. About the testing though, what a while ago, Jared, you talked to me about MegaCheck, and I think they renamed it or integrated it now into static checks in the static check suite. Is that something we might want to have also for our testing? And if there are maybe problems getting this running on Circle CI or not, I don't know.
Yeah, no, static check is just binary. It's great. I've used it for a long time. I commented it into the PR. We decided to punt on it for this PR just to get it in. But yeah, I mean, add in static check. I have no idea right now if it runs or what breaks with static check, but it's one of the best static analyzers for Go. So totally, I'm all for it.
If you're the one implementing static check, though, you also have to fix all the things that are wrong with static.
Right, exactly. The build has to pass once it's in.
Sounds promising.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then so this is that it starts in API server and then maybe expects etcd or so running. Goes that already into that direction of like integration tests, or is that just unit tests? Okay, so this would be then like I think the fifth we had on this item list of like what do we want to actually test, and then integration tests was one part of that then too. Okay, cool, like it.
Thank you. Toby this week issued and merged a KEP for a default baseline framework that we focus efforts on to provide a great first example for what can be run with KUDO. So I wanted to turn it over to him, talking about requirements for what it takes to run Kafka and Zookeeper in production, and status on that.
Awesome. So yeah, the way I'm thinking about this is, let's kind of start with a list of what we would expect from a stable framework in general. So it can be things like, hey, if it has more than one version available, there needs to be an upgrade path, things like that. So what I think we should all think about, what are those lifecycle events that we want to support to consider something stable? Like, if it's a database, should backup and restore be part of the standard stable functionality or not? And I talked to Ravi a little bit about this. I think he's on the call too. We do have something like this for DCOS SDK frameworks. There's sort of a checklist of what they need to support. So I think we can draw some inspiration from that. I think user stories or something that looks like user stories will be a good way to express that in the CAP. So hoping to get to that in the next few days.
One quick question: would we just have a general set of requirements, or would we have like individual features which can be marked individual as like alpha, beta, GA?
Yeah, what do y'all think?
I think so when we initially started talking about this CAP, to me this was about using this as first to help define what features we needed in KUDO in order to call KUDO 1.0. Like if we can really say, a production ready framework, what features are required in KUDO to do so, and using this as the model of that. And then subsequent to that, using this as the benchmark for future features and including, well, does this work in our model house framework as part of the acceptance criteria, right? So to me, the stability of a framework itself probably belongs more in the hands of the vendor implementing that framework. So, I don't know if KUDO itself should define that, but rather someone else who's supporting, like Mesosphere supporting frameworks, right? Like that might be two different criteria, right? Because that manifestation of the framework may not include everything our model house includes because it doesn't need to, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. KUDO, cannot decide if the backup mechanism, for example, that is provided by a package author is stable or not. That's not a concern for KUDO, but I think what KUDO can do is say, you must have a backup and restore mechanism to be considered stable. But yeah, it's a little bit. I wonder how we can draw that line.
Yeah. So I'm just thinking specific to this, I agree with you, in that, but to me that's beyond the scope of this model house Kafka, right? Because I want to say if we go implement a higher level backup and restore, right? It should work with for that feature to be merged and the feature to be considered in that, the model house needs to be updated to support that, right? This Kafka that's this model house framework is probably going to have more features than most frameworks need to include. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then for that discussion, that gets around a distribution, which we have the frameworks repo, and then maybe as part of what would our frameworks distribution system, then we can start talking about, okay, you need to pass this set of checks. We can statically analyze your YAML and say, is this clear to publish or not?
Yeah.
Whatever, right?
Yeah.
That is. Yeah,
The way I'm thinking about this is almost like KUDO being the ops person with the production checklist that talks to the developer and says, hey, if you want to put this in production, you need to check these boxes. That person's not going to go in and look at the code of that thing that's going to get deployed and make sure that it works properly, but it is kind of a checklist.
Yeah.
That's how I'm thinking about it.
And checklist and kind of processes, right? If we have tutorials or something, that we just kind of guide people towards making it easy to develop those, what we've called certified frameworks.
I still see frameworks as being owned by a different group than KUDO necessarily. I don't see the KUDO team as supporting end frameworks. What I think Jared is kind of leaning towards here is that we're using this framework as a integration validation test on features and capabilities of KUDO itself. And then references for developers to go use. I would almost rather a different framework that validates each capability that gets called in integration tests that can clearly showcase this capability and it working or not. So I don't have an example off the top of my head, but sometimes it doesn't make sense for certain frameworks to implement certain capabilities. And it's just not applicable at all, even though it's applicable to some other frameworks. So rather than having to now, oh, Kafka and Zookeeper don't use this new feature that's in there, well, let's go make a whole new supported framework from KUDO that does actually leverage it. And now we're supporting kind of enough frameworks that cover the union of all the capabilities of KUDO, rather than new feature comes in, give me a toy example that clearly focuses capability testing on this upgrade process works. So I just want to, I hesitate sometimes to make the framework be the integration test. I think there's a lot of value for having specific frameworks to showcase capabilities, but I think frameworks need to be owned by a group that would then support and manage merges into that framework. So in the frameworks or packages, I think Fabi wants to call it, you know, there's an owner's file for Kafka, and if Mesosphere is the owner of that framework, they provide the additional checks for functionality of, yes, we think our backup is now actually supported. We support this, or we validate that it works correctly. Outside of standard YAML linting and basic checks that KUDO could do as part of its CI/CD.
Well, that touches a little bit on we will always have frameworks that are so unique that you cannot like abstract something out of it and apply it to all the other frameworks. But yet there are some frameworks, and we started with Kafka and Zookeeper, and maybe we look at the upgrades and find similar paths that follow some certain like best practices and for deployments and so forth, that we can capture then on the KUDO side, that other people who want to come up with frameworks or the maintainers of the framework don't have to do, because this is common knowledge that is shared like with all of the other frameworks. And those, if we identify those, and the more frameworks we get, the more we probably will have, it would probably make sense, in my opinion, to have those under KUDO, and then those specialized cases under the actual like team that maintains this framework or package, or what we ever call. And that also goes back to what Jörg says earlier. We probably need to think about, and we talk about this later, the package version scheme and graduation criteria. Maybe we don't have defined those, and also the naming, alpha, beta, then production or GA or however we call it. And then we have like certain steps to basically graduate from one stage to the other stage.
Hey guys, let's split this conversation in two, because we got some of this in open discussion. Focus on the KEP itself. Like the KEP itself is defining a model house framework so that we can set prioritized features to hit 1.0 of KUDO, and by deploying a production ready model house. I think I may have red herring by like future acceptance criteria, and Tom, I think I agree with you, and we'll sort that part out later. So from the perspective of this particular KEP, this is just about, and Toby, correct me if I'm wrong, this is just about setting a stake in the ground of what we want to work on then, and then in open discussion, let's keep having this discussion. I just want to make sure that we are all happy and agree on the KEP itself.
Sure. And if there are more questions or so, we can always comment on the KEP, and don't want to use the 5 minutes from here too much.
Yeah, hi guys, here's Zan. I just wanted to add on like on the same and what you guys were talking about, like also see like, you know, there's like two kind of things, like two kind of features with like Kubernetes expertise, you know, like which should be the best practices to build an operator. For example, like I would like to just to put like right example for stateful sets. There's like, you know, you cannot upgrade it by default. It's a bug if something goes wrong, for example, and many people who build operators, they discover this flag like later in the, you know, in production and things like that. So this would I expect from KUDO to, you know, like put it by default. So this should be like best practices, and people, we can say that if you had built that through KUDO, it would not happen, you know. And this kind of, the other part is totally framework knowledge. That would be, like that the Tom was talking, Fabian also, that's like max search has to be one pod only, and just wait on this. And that would be, yeah, totally coming from framework. But yeah, on the KUDO part, I would expect them to, like lead on some best practices, and we can leverage on that and say that, yeah, this happens when you build an operator from KUDO. Yeah.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, thanks.
Toby, are you feeling good with that? That just on the on this specific cap, and then continuing the discussion around everything York's saying, and the rest of this discussion in this what is the package, what is the framework convo?
Yeah, that works for me.
Okay, cool. So I guess the diff then we need to figure out is, yeah, we'll have some general framework requirements, and then that'll hopefully translate out into like what I would love for this cap to do. And then, sorry, Tom, I'll turn it back over to you. What I would love for this cap to do is make it really clear in our existing caps where our gaps are and where we need to go to actually say this is usable beyond our small little group, right? I don't like, and then I'm happy with like that's, and then we can open another cap to actually define like our distribution, our packages, our frameworks, and we can probably argue till we all turn blue about that one. But I want to make sure this one doesn't spin out of control on us. There's already been discussions on like which Kafka and which framework and everything. And this to me as written and what I think we talked about and Toby talked about is just about that stake in the ground. So I think we're gonna have to keep fighting to keep the scope on this one tight, and then we can bloom out into this conversation. So that's all I had on that.
All right.
Thanks, Jared.
Moving on.
That's good. We had a couple open discussion items. We have about 10 minutes left.
Yeah, I added those. I'll make it quick if you don't mind if I just talk about the 3 points there. So I noticed that in the past when we were talking about I installed, let's stick with Kafka, the Kafka framework, that when you then like from a developer perspective look at it, it was kind of confusing because we have the framework YAML, we have the framework version, and the instance YAML so far. So when you talk about the framework verbally or everywhere in the Slack, it's not clear to me what you actually mean. So I would vote for using the term package when we actually talk about the whole bundle of those things in action, what is server-side installed. And then when we talk about a framework, it's then clear to me that it's a framework YAML. But I see this namespace colliding or a conflict there. I don't know if anyone else sees that. So that's why I wanted to bring that up.
Would a package name and a framework name ever be different?
Well, so you can think about the package name as Kafka, and then the framework name probably be no, they wouldn't be. They would be the same. Yeah, that's right. But one has 2 more things, and the other one just has 1 thing. That's framework.
I think it only has 1 more thing. I don't think an instance by default, but that's as I commented on the CLI.
Yeah,
I know what you mean. One of them has the framework and framework version so that you can actually create an instance, where the other is just that group.
Yeah, and then so I got inspired when I looked, for instance, at our DCOS SDK. And so we talked there about the Cassandra framework, but then on the CLI side, we don't talk about a framework. We talk about the CLI package that, or the package that you install. Yeah, there's no command line reference of a framework. Yeah, and so what I really want to try is not to do the same, bring up the same confusion that we brought up maybe in the past with other things, and make this here right. So the first attack point was their framework and package. They kind of like, let's find a concept for this.
So paralleling this to other systems, your package is a Helm chart, where it's the definition of how to create that capability on the cluster, and then you can create an instance, a framework after you've installed one of these packages.
Yeah, for instance.
Oh.
So the thing with packages goes also then later into the next bullet point when we talk about package versioning and scheme. What I would like, since we're running also a little bit out of time, just propose is that I'll start a cap, or I don't know if you need a cap for that, or if that the sign doc is fine, where it's just like talk about different problems with versioning, because that's really hard. Ravi was also like talking with me about this, and I think that was very, very productive there. So we come up with a new kind of like scheme, or with a scheme, because we don't have one yet, that helps us to, for other people who want to write frameworks, also to know how should we actually do the versioning and what kind of rules should we follow. And that goes then also in line, and that's the place where I thought about it, was how do we install it? How should the structure of our KUDO Builder frameworks repo should look like? That should reflect the scheme and the version structure as well. So yeah.
This goes to a conversation that Jared and I had somewhere about framework versions and what it means. It's not my interpretation that there's a new framework version for each version of the software. It is my interpretation that a new framework version comes out when you have a new architecture to support a new version of the software.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
So in that aspect, I don't always associate Kafka version with framework version. I associate them with an architecture change that may result from a movement from 3.0 to 4.0, not actually for Kafka, but where you need to now deploy and manage your life cycle differently, since the framework version captures what it means to deploy and what it means to manage your application. So when those things change, we have a new framework version. But for upgrading Kafka from 2.1.2.1 to 2.2, assuming everything else functions the same way in terms of your management of that application, that to me is the same framework version. Mm-hmm. And the upgrade of that application version is handled by one of the plans inside that framework version.
So what happens then to a customer that doesn't like that upgrade and wants to use an earlier version?
In that situation, the Docker image that captures the application version would be a parameter of the framework version, and they can set that parameter to be the value they would like.
So instead of having an incremented, like we have this DCOS integration number, this ABC and then -XY set, and so that would be the ABC. But you said, like, instead of having this to choose, we would probably override the parameter for the Docker image. And
right. So the instance, the instantiation of that framework version would define a particular Kafka version, and this probably goes into adding regex for parameter values at some point to know that you have a value that's supported or not. And then when you need to change your version to a version that's no longer supported by your framework version, you probably need a new framework version that has different operations in place, because the framework vendor changed the way backups and restores happen. So now we can no longer run the plans that are defined in framework version 1. We now need framework version 1.1 that is a new set of operations or a new implementation of those operations as part of its definition for its application.
Right.
And there could be some overlap in what versions of the application that are supported in different versions of the framework.
I mean, I like all these ideas, and I really want to capture them in a document, and then because there are so many approaches with versioning, and it's so hard. So let's hopefully what I want as a goal that we come out of it is something that actually can we also show to the community that we figured versioning out about operators.
Yeah. Oh boy, that's a bold claim.
Yeah. So that we have the kind of like the clearance and the guidance of how to like make those kind of stable and not, for instance, I talked with Ravi and we had Minio used for their own versioning, like timestamps. So there's like every like package or framework always uses their own kind of versioning, and it's really hard to combine them together. Similar how we talked earlier, like it's really hard like to have the special feature in Kafka and then abstract it and find a common ground there. So what we need to do with the versioning there is finding this common ground that will work for all of it. And I think there are a lot of edge cases that we need to consider. That's why I think it's best writing it down and collecting the ideas and then deciding for one, because that also kind of leads into guides the direction of the CLI and other features in the UI, how users can pinpoint, for instance, if you have alpha, beta, I just want to install the alpha version, or what is the criteria for the beta version. But that pinpoints also the integration test if we have like a matrix of what we say is a stable version and so forth. So all goes along with each other.
All right, thanks, Fabi. We're about out of time. I think Jared just had one more comment regarding KEPs in work in progress, and then we'll reconvene next week where Jorg is going to lead our discussion.
Ooh.
Yeah, so my only comment here is we have a proliferation of KEPs, which is fantastic, but and we're making really good progress. But as we go forward and we get other contributors, limiting work in progress is always a really good thing. In teams that I've always been in, it's been team size +1, and it doesn't really translate well to open source projects, of course. But and we're doing really good at this. So hopefully we can just get this as a quick decision and we make it in public and adjust as needed. But I'd like to make sure that we're limiting our WIP on KEPs we're actively implementing, maybe to, we're working on one KEP at a time unless we're blocked and breaking on that KEP. From an implementation standpoint, commenting and putting thoughts and helping do the design of other KEPs, I don't think counts towards that, but want to avoid having, each of us having 3 KEPs that are implementable, and we're all trying to deliver on 3 KEPs at once, right? We can have 3 KEPs in implementable state, but then prioritize. And I'm hoping the Kafka Zookeeper will help prioritize that. But I think if anyone has any questions of I have 3 KEPs that I own that I'm delivering on, what should I be prioritizing? Come chat with, I guess us as a group, or come chat with me at least, and we can frame it in alongside this, Kafka production readiness or whatever we're doing, and help determine that priority if you feel overwhelmed with it. So that was my only point. Let's just strive to keep WIP low on actual implementable work, which we're doing now. So I think we all get it. If anyone disagrees, let me know. But that was my only comment.
Thanks, Jared. Thank you, everyone, for taking some time today. And look forward to seeing you next Thursday, same time, same place.
Bye, everyone.
All right, wonderful. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Tom, for hosting.
Anytime.